got some major breaking news for you at the top of the 5 o'clock today. The BBC doctored footage of a Donald Trump speech a second time. And more than that, they ignored concerns that were raised about it at the time. And that's according to the Telegraph. Now, spliced footage of the speech, which aired in an episode of Newsnight back in 2022, it may appear that Mr. Trump was encouraging his supporters to riot. Now, the edit was very similar to a version aired in that Panorama documentary that was broadcast last year, a full 2 years later.
This important interruption is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Protect your money and your identity. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code here to get ExpressVPN right now and save up to 73% on annual plans today. Right, let's get back into it.
It's an incredible twist to this tale. I'm joined in the studio to discuss it by GBNews' Homeland Security Editor Mark White and also GBNews' Political Editor Chris Hope. Chris, let's come to you first. A huge development. We're some 30 hours away now from the deadline of that $1 billion lawsuit. Sorry has been the hardest word for the BBC to say thus far. And here is a fresh plot twist.
This is really, really worrying, I think, for the BBC, going into a crucial 36-hour period before that deadline, 10 p.m. tomorrow night. Do they settle or do they go ahead with this challenge, what Donald Trump's doing, suing for $1 billion for damage to him for this edited Panorama clip? We know all about that from this report by Michael Prescott. What's emerged right now, this hour, from the Telegraph newspaper is a similar Newsnight, a similar clip was edited, according to the Telegraph, at the same time. That was back in 2022. According to the Telegraph, it's made it clear that Mr. Trump was encouraging his supporters to riot. A very similar edit that was done in the Panorama documentary, which led to the resignation of both Tim Davies, the former Director-General now, and of course Deborah Turness, the CEO of BBC News. This is really, really serious. If this is the case, we're waiting to hear back from the BBC. If this is the case, it explains to me why the BBC top management didn't react strongly when they were first alerted in that Michael Prescott dossier. Why didn't they react and say, let's deal with this, if they felt, well, actually all we're doing is showing something which appeared in 2022? And it means that the BBC were, according to the Telegraph, aware of this for 3 years and nothing happened.
Mark White, more than that, Team Trump were aware of this. They were aware of this at the time. They complained about this at the time. And that warning seemingly wasn't even heeded.
That's right, because on this Newsnight programme was a former Trump Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, who, when he saw this clip go out, very similar edit to the Panorama one that we have now seen so many times before, that gives that absolute impression that he's telling supporters to go to the Capitol and to fight like hell, that was not actually the way that the speech was put together. But the presenter at the time, according to the Telegraph, Kirsty Wark, again, according to what they are getting from the story they have assembled, dismissed the concerns of Mick Mulvaney, and the programme continued. And of course, then we know 2 years later that this Panorama appeared with almost a similar edit. Now, an interesting thing to add to this is about the pressure that it puts on another BBC News executive, yes, Jonathan Munro, yes, who is the deputy to Deborah Turness, who, of course, we know resigned alongside Tim Davies. Now, he at the time was the man in ultimate charge of BBC Newsnight. So there clearly are some issues and some questions for him to answer on this. Now, what we don't know at this stage, of course, is what was actually said after this programme, whether they did some research of their own to realise that actually they'd, spliced one piece of Trump's speech with another piece of President Trump's speech to make it sound as though he was saying something completely different. And if they did realise that, why that wasn't put further up the chain, or if it was, how it wasn't then discovered in a Panorama programme 2 years later, last year, when it went to air.
And another huge question is, who did the edit? October Films, there's been a lot of fingers pointed at them, but this was 2 years full before Panorama. There's a huge question to be had there. I have to go to my next guest, Chris, come back to you in a moment's time. I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. live by GBNews presenter of The Late Show Live, Ben Leo. Ben, welcome to the show. Astonishing breaking news. And last night, our Beth Turner asked Caroline Levitt, do you think that Donald Trump will sue the BBC? Now, there's a second reason to do so.
Yeah, goodness me, it just gets worse and worse for the BBC, doesn't it? So detail, as maybe Mark and Chopper have just covered, the second separate speech came from a Newsnight programme in 2022. A former White House Chief of Staff who was a guest on that Newsnight programme in 2022 complained about the spliced footage on air moments after it was broadcast in the UK, and the presenter, Kirsty Walk, just completely ignored it. So concerns were raised at the time about the editing of footage, similar to what Panorama did, and he was just totally ignored. So this poses a lot more questions for the BBC. Is it a culture? Is it a habit that the BBC have got into, persuaded by political bias, that they continue to do this with the likes of President Trump and a myriad of other topics? I've been speaking to the legal sources behind President Trump's case against the BBC. Of course, tomorrow, Martin, viewers and listeners, the clock is ticking. Tomorrow is the deadline, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. UK time, for the BBC to come forward and say, sorry, Mr. Trump, here's a settlement, here's an offer of some compensation. I can confirm that the BBC, as of yet, haven't even acknowledged President Trump's lawyers' letters. They've not even confirmed receipt of it. So whisper on the grapevine is that the BBC are mulling their options with regards to potentially taking on Trump in court. But as I've been saying all week, this would present one of the biggest gambles in the corporation's history. Do you really want to go face-to-face with President Trump in a Floridian court in front of a judge on a $1 billion gamble, which, by the way, would be coming from licence fee payers? So tomorrow's the deadline. This, again, piles more pressure on the BBC to answer some questions. They're going to have to address this. They're going to have to, whether the Trump's legal team will consider this in their case tomorrow with regards to the deadline, I don't know. I'll try and find out. But the clock's ticking, and more embarrassment for the BBC. And again, you'd have to argue this just proves President Trump's case that the BBC, as they said yesterday in the White House press conference, have been behaving, in this instance, like a left-wing propaganda outlet.
Astonishing stuff. Thank you, Ben Leo, there from Washington, D.C.
Every time you're online, your money and your identity are at risk. Scams now make up nearly 40% of all crime in the UK. That's thousands of attacks every single day. In Britain, someone has their identity stolen every 2 minutes, leaving victims with wrecked finances and years of stress. The threat is real, and you could be next. ExpressVPN is your shield against criminals. It locks down your devices, hiding your personal information and financial details from hackers, scammers, and anyone else looking to exploit you. So whether you're checking your bank, shopping, or just browsing, ExpressVPN makes you invisible to prying eyes trying to steal your money and your identity. ExpressVPN shields your data with military-grade AES 256 encryption. That's the same standard trusted by the US government to guard classified information. This is the highest level of online security you can get. So don't wait for disaster. Secure up to 14 devices at once and get powerful password protection. Real support is available 24/7 because cybercrime never sleeps. Save up to 73% on annual plans today. Every moment you hesitate is another moment you're exposed. Protect your money and protect your identity. Get ExpressVPN right now.
It's an explosive exclusive. I'm delighted to be joined in the studio in Westminster by GBNews presenter and the associate editor of The Telegraph, Camilla Tominey. Camilla, our jaws are on our desks. The BBC banged to rights 2 years ago doing the same monkey business.
I know. So this Newsnight episode of June the 9th, 2022 was flagged to us by somebody called David Chaudroy, who used to work as a graphic designer on the show. And he said that he felt there was something eerily familiar about the way that Panorama had spliced the clip of the speech for that documentary that they put out in October last year. We then sort of interrogated that line of thinking and thought to ourselves, well, what do you remember? And he said, I remember it vividly. I worked on that episode. It was presented by Kirsty Walk, and it featured a Republican calling out the splicing live on air. To be fair, it even had an air of familiarity with me because I watch Newsnight a lot, watch all news programmes, watch GB News programmes, watch everything I can in order to be well informed. So something familiar about it. Never got picked up at the time. Obviously, the Newsnight episode plays out very, very clearly. You can see how the clip has been edited. It's not exactly the same edit as Panorama, it should be pointed out, but you still get this splicing between we will march and we will fight like hell, which is presented seamlessly as if it hasn't been edited, and then the imagery cuts to scenes of people fighting. The fact that Mick Mulvaney calls it out live on air, even though he is not at that point a Trump supporter, this should also be pointed out. Yeah. He was White House Chief of Staff. He left after January the 6th because he was disgusted with what happened in the Capitol that day. And then he went on to be quite a vocal Trump critic. He says to Kirsty Walk, who, can I just caveat, is a journalist I've always respected and admired. He says to her, hang on, that clip's not quite right. That's how it plays out on the show. The show is coming to an end, admittedly. There's another reporter on there from BuzzFeed commenting on the events in Washington that day. The show comes to an end without further incident. David Chaudhry, our whistleblower, says that he vividly remembers being in an editorial meeting the next morning where somebody, one of the producers, and we're all in telly, so we know how this works, you have a post-mortem of the show the night before, and you say to each other, what happened with that clip? That was a bit embarrassing. Mick Mulvaney called it out live on air. Concerns were raised. According to Mr. Chaudhry, quickly dismissed. We have, at the Telegraph, put all of this to the BBC and we are awaiting a response. So we put in our inquiry at noon. We gave them a deadline of 4. They're still ruminating.
Well, they can ruminate for a bit longer. In the meantime, by the way, the Telegraph has been astonishing on this story. Hats off to the Telegraph. Let's take a look at that Telegraph clip so you can decide for yourselves about the misrepresentation. Here it is.
To cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we fight. We fight like hell. And we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
So that's the clip the Telegraph have put out some 33 minutes ago. I think it's worthwhile at this juncture showing the Panorama clip as well, so we can compare them like for like. Here's the clip from Panorama.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
So, Camilla Tominey, what you almost see there is version 1, if you like, was not quite as out there, but the BBC kind of got a taste for it.
Yes.
Version 2, they trimmed it back further to make the same point, but with more gravity.
I mean, to be fair, let's be generous to Newsnight. They did include that line about congressmen and women that was absent from the Panorama edit. Obviously, this edit has taken place in the June of 2022. The Panorama documentary goes out on the 28th of October 2024. But I think the key critical aspect of this story, and what makes it, in a way, slightly worse than Panorama, are 2 different distinctions. First of all, it's called out live on air by somebody who is a Trump critic, not a Trump supporter, point 1. So it's already been flagged to senior editorial staff at the corporation that something's not quite right there. Nevertheless, footage is edited in a similar way for Panorama. Point 2, obviously the Telegraph and those who support our expose of concerns about a lack of impartiality at the national broadcaster have been accused of orchestrating a right-wing plot against the BBC. Robbie Gibb, the former Director of Communications from Number 10, there's calls for his head to roll because, goodness me, there's a righty on the BBC board, we can't allow that, and all the rest of it. This lends itself to something different because you could, if you wanted, mount an argument to say that Michael Prescott may have links to Robbie Gibb. He then, apparently, whoever leaked the dossier and it ended up with the Telegraph, which is a right-leaning newspaper, that kind of lends itself some credence. I don't believe it at all, by the way. I think it's absolutely preposterous to blame good journalists for pointing out bad journalism. Chopper and I have worked with Gordon Rayner for years. He's an exceptional journalist who is forensic in his approach to exposés like this, point 1. But also, well, this can't be a right-wing plot, can it?
No.
If the BBC have treated the same speech in the same way on 2 different occasions, to splice it, to make it look as if March on the Capitol and Fight Like Hell happened seamlessly. No, it didn't. He didn't say that. He said it 54 minutes apart, those 2 statements.
Do you think this might explain why the BBC seemed so relaxed when it was first raised by Michael Prescott in January and May this year? Because if it aired already in 2022 and it's in the system, as all things are in the BBC, they thought, well let's do it again, because it makes no sense.
But this speaks to the entire nub of the problem.
Yeah.
That when they looked at this originally, they shrugged their shoulders because they said, well, it should be spliced by that because we all know that Trump was complicit in the January 6 riots. It's evidence of a groupthink that they think it's a fait accompli that the US president incited what happened on Capitol Hill that day in 2021.
I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, it's a different edit. It's clearly a different edit. It's similar, but it's a different edit to Panorama. It's a different team. But they clearly came to the same kind of conclusion in their heads, which was splice 2 bits together that still give the impression that here is this man inciting a riot. And in fact, Kirsty Wark, who, yes, we have respect for, and I'm sure it wasn't her that spliced the edit together as a presenter, it wouldn't have been. But she used that speech then to punch home her point to Mick Mulvaney that, you know, does this guy really believe in democracy?
Just want to add, if I could, as well as the Telegraph allowing the BBC to have a right of reply, GBNews has also approached the BBC for a right of reply. Perhaps they can ruminate on that at the same time as they ruminate on the Telegraph right of reply. We've yet to hear anything back, neither have you. We'll await that with bated breath. But Camilla Tominey, I wanted to come back to this central point. There's been this incredible politically aligned defence of the BBC. Ed Davey, you know, blaming Donald Trump, blaming Nigel Farage, blaming anybody but the BBC and its patent and provable failures. This second incident, as you said, because it was flagged at the time on air in an editorial dissection the following morning, ignored. The book squarely and fully stops with the BBC.
Yes. Also, Robbie Gibb and others on the BBC board, there are 12 people, including the Director-General and the chairman. So it's a bit patronising and insulting to the other members of the board to suggest that Robbie Gibb can somehow control their minds, control their thinking and manipulate this situation in his favour. That would be my first point. My second point would be that others presumably have to declare their own interests too, and everybody privately has an opinion about politics. So Robbie Gibb, famously described by Emily Maitlis, formerly of Newsnight, of being an agent of the Conservative Party. Well, there have been reporters, including her own co-star Lewis Goodall, who was a Labour activist back in the day. Apparently, it's unacceptable for anybody on the right to be appointed to any BBC position, seemingly. But if you're on the left, then it's fine, presumably because your progressive thinking aligns generally with the ideology of the broadcaster. That's what we're saying here. And I suppose if we want to turn it on our heads, and let's be introspective here at GB News, because I think that's always important, that would be to say that we wouldn't give equal weight to a left-wing voice as we do to a right-wing voice on any story. Well, we know we always do that because we're presenting shows all the time with panel debates between left and right, to make sure that the presentation that we're giving to any different opinion is balanced. If you're presenting stuff that is dishonest in its presentation because it's been spliced without the audience knowing, that's problematic. I'd further add that if the GB News had done this, Chris, there'd be calls for us to be taken off the air.
Camilla, Chris, can I interject? Because we've just now located that clip of Mick Mulvaney calling this out live on air. Let's take a look.
Your video actually spliced together the presentation. He said, we're going to go down and we're going to cheer on our senators and our House members. And then it actually goes on to say, in some of them we might not be able to. And that line about it, we fight and fight like hell, is actually later in the speech. And yet your video makes it look like those two things came together.
So there you have it. Live on air, on the show, called out forever, a matter of public record, called out, banged to rights, ignored at the time, ignored in the morning. Camilla Tominey, the nightmare grows to the BBC.
It does. I mean, also, we're on the precipice of them apparently deciding whether they issue this apology. And meet Trump's conditions to ward off this $1 billion lawsuit. That deadline is fast approaching, isn't it? I mean, when do we expect to hear from either the BBC or indeed the White House in response to those conditions?
OK.